We are going to talk about Clyde Travel Management, the evolution of airfare pricing. Paul is the managing director of Clyde Travel Management, a global corporate travel management company that is specialized in the marine, offshore and renewable travel sectors. They have headquarters in Scotland, but also a local team here in Gothenburg. And Clyde is a part of Stena Group. Paul will engage you all by sharing his views about the evolution of airfare pricing. Please welcome Paul Kron here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Now, arguably, speaking about travel is not as sexy as autonomous shipping, I'll admit. But we all fly, and travel is quite a large component of our profit and loss statements these days. In fact, many figures point to about a 45% increase in airfare pricing in the last year. So I am going to take this opportunity to talk about the cost of travel. When we speak about travel nowadays, it's almost forbidden not to mention technology or sustainability, but I will not speak of those today. Other specialists can talk about that. We will talk about money instead, because as the leader of a travel management company, I am most frequently asked by customers, how do you get the best airfares? And I think my colleagues from the industry will hear this question very often as well. And this was a very appropriate question to ask, I think, as recently as 5 years ago, when airfare pricing enjoyed a lot of parity in the central reservation systems globally that you could get. We had large travel agency alliances globally that got bulk buying power to reduce some of the airfares. But we also had a huge amount of unfilled capacity in the skies, loads of empty seats. And that meant that airlines actually brought out stupendously low fares. We just came out of an era of exceptionally low cost to travel. And suddenly, it's a bit of a shock for us after the pandemic to find that airfares are incredibly high. I think airlines would like us to ask the question a bit differently. They would like us to ask, how do we access the most appropriate fares rather than the cheapest fares? Why is that? Well, I think generally nowadays we assume that everything is more expensive, and therefore air travel must be more expensive as well. You know, there's a lot of demand and maybe not as much supply as we used to have, with a lot fewer flights and empty seats. The global costs of operating a flight has increased, and that's being passed on in the airfare as well. And I'm sure many people are relieved at this, because we also know of the damage to the environment that excessive flying does. So the higher the airfares, the less we are to travel, of course. But the reality for the maritime sector is that you are dependent on a very fluid international workforce that needs to crisscross the globe, and therefore our P&Ls in the maritime sector will carry quite a high burden of airfares for some time to come. Now, we cannot deny that the economic forces of supply and demand usually under normal circumstances will mean higher airfares. That is true. But it's also masking a different reality, and that is that the face of travel, as well as the distribution and the access to travel content, has changed quite radically without us necessarily noticing it in an obvious way in the last 5 years. Now, I am not a representative of the aviation industry. I can see some of my colleagues from the industry here in the room who may disagree politely with me after this conversation. But I'm speaking as part of the maritime value distribution chain. So our company is involved in crew management. Global shipping companies engage our services to get their crew from A to B, and we buy a huge amount of tickets from global airlines. So this is my point of view and my perspective as part of that chain. But at Clyde Travel Management, as Pernella said, we're not just a travel agency loose standing from your environment. We are owned by a ship management company and ultimately by ship owners as well. So I can see the effect of this from all angles. So for my thoughts to make sense, and I really hope I succeed in that, I'm going to backtrack a little bit and then take a few steps forward and try and ask this big question: how is airfare distribution actually going to impact manning agents and ship owners in the future, but especially right now? Now, something anecdotal more. I live in Glasgow, in Scotland, and quite close to us is the National Museum of Flight. And there, the first Concorde that was ordered by British Airways has now found her final resting place in this museum. My son wants to be a pilot, so we go to this place quite regularly, and it's highly interactive. You can get onto this plane and talk to people who used to work on it, for example. It's the type of museum that really inspires a young kid to join the travel industry. It's just that every time I go, I leave very depressed and very sad about it all, because stepping onto this aircraft really does transport you back to a different world of travel. And I do apologize. I am now raving about a fuel-guzzling plane here in the home of Flugsham. So fuel consumption aside, this takes you back to a very different view of travel than what we enjoy today. What makes me sad is that that ended 20 years ago in my lifetime. Unlike going to the British Museum and seeing some Egyptian artifact, this is here and now, since I've joined the travel industry. And why does this depress me so much? What has changed then? I think that comes from a time when airlines were symbols of national pride. British Airways still fly under the banner to fly, to serve. That was their purpose. And it was there to foster routes and connectivity for the people of that country and the countries with whom they wanted to do business. But of course, today, airlines are no longer symbols of national pride. They are commercial entities, with the exception of one or two, of course. But they only fly for good reason. And they will only dish up the lobster for good reason. And therefore, they will only distribute the airfares and the seats to certain groups for good reason. And that reason is a commercial, financial one and no other. And I think in this regard, all of us can empathize with airlines. We all make decisions for our businesses for its financial sustainability. And I think it's only right. And of course, airlines are free to do this if they want to be around for a long time. But let us take romance out of it just for a moment. A superintendent joining a vessel in Singapore isn't exactly going for sightseeing or for the meal on board. They are going to work. They are commuting. And hundreds of millions of other passengers in the skies are corporate people who are not going to enjoy a leisurely experience. They are there to work, and they've got different needs and different requirements. All they really need, if we want to be truthful, is they need to get from A to B safely and in a cost-effective way, preferably. So if that is the true travel product, then we shouldn't be surprised that about 20 years ago enters those airlines who see that the job of an airline commercially is to get people from A to B and nothing more. Now, we used to call them low-cost carriers because in the early 2000s, that's what they were in comparison with legacy carriers that had a national flag on the tail of the plane. But in reality, they're closer to no-frill airlines because they took a lot of the product of what we understood to be the aviation product out of the equation. They also had a unique distribution policy for the time, and that was the internet, so that they and the traveler could have a conversation on the web, cutting out their own big central reservation desks, travel agencies, tour operators, and you can just see how cutting out all those costs could lead, among other factors, to a huge drop in airfares. the thing is that Ryanair and British Airways don't exactly operate in two different worlds. They operate in exactly the same sphere, and that is to get people from A to B. The rest is marketing and perception. Now, time has, of course, wiped out some of the differences between legacy carriers and no-frill airlines, without us necessarily noticing that change. Today, you could fly cheaper with a legacy carrier than with a no-frills carrier. The airfare parity has come between some of these, especially short haul, of course. And sometimes I do wonder if there's any frills left on a legacy carrier. Some of them are just so boring. There's nothing to differentiate between them. On the other hand, a no-frills airline like EasyJet, you can start with a no-frill fare, but by the time you check out, or check in, shall I say, you are saddled with so many extra things like speedy boarding and baggage and seats and food and insurance and rental cars that it's no longer no-frills, is it? I sometimes wonder what the Concorde passenger would make of all of that if they were to travel today. But if you look at human behavior, I'm sure some people would have paid extra to have the lobster from rows 1 to 5, and then some would still be happy to eat plastic semi-warm sandwiches at the back of the Concorde. I don't know. We would have evolved with it. My conclusion one then, when it comes to airfare pricing, is that what we are paying for in the sky has changed for good. And in order for airlines to compete with one another in price, the product had to give. Now, this is predominantly in the short haul. I think when we talk about long-haul travel, there's still a lot that separates airlines from one another. So this is not a big generalization. But short-haul costs are now on parity, and so is the product, which is largely a boring one, in my opinion. If we want more than just traveling from A to B, we all have to recognize that we need to ask ourselves, well, what do we need? And if we know what we need, do we need a bag? Do we need a seat? Do we need a meal? We have to pay for it. If you don't need it, don't buy it. That is the new world of airline pricing that we need to adjust to. And not expect more, because it ain't coming back, as far as I can tell. My second point here is, it may actually not be necessary any longer for airlines to create special products and special fares for special groups of people. What do I mean with this? They don't make A380s anymore. They're just too big, loads of seats to sell. So if airlines are opting for smaller aircraft that are more fuel efficient, not many of them are actually struggling to fill their planes. And subsequently, there's not a lot of special offers to begin with. So why would they continue to carry special products to entice people to travel with them if that's not necessary? These special products, for example, are the ones created for business people, like private corporate fares, for example, marine and offshore fares, which many people in this building would use, public sector workers, charity workers, and the best one yet this morning, I learned that Turkish Airlines has got special fares for martyrs. I don't think long-suffering spouses qualify for that, but there is a category for all sorts of passengers, it turns out. The thing is that if you've been in a business class cabin on Emirates or Qatar or Etihad recently, you would have seen that the cabin is filled with couples going on honeymoon or traveling to see the grandchildren who emigrated to Australia. It's not exactly filled with business people the way it used to. And frankly, it's quite rare to see vast eligibility for business class in the average travel policy these days, especially after the 2008 economic crash. Then, of course, some airlines cling on to that unique selling point, that differentiator. We have our friends at Qatar Airways who has got a dedicated lounge for seafarers in Doha. They've made it clear these people are important to them. On the other side of the coin, American Airlines have just removed their entire marine product from their inventory. That is, you cannot get a marine airfare with 2 bags and all the flexibility that we enjoy in this sector on any American Airlines plane. Why would they do that? Does that mean that that seafarers are no longer important? Or does it simply mean that they want us to buy their product in a different way? I'll quickly add here that neither Ryanair or Wizz Air, who serves the maritime industry pretty well here in Europe, have got a marine product. And yet at Clyde Travel, we have ticketed in excess of £2 million of airfare with those airlines in the last year, serving the maritime sector. But at the same time, is this coincidental that American Airlines, for example, has also removed almost half of all their content and their fares from the world's leading distribution systems in the last few months? These fares, half of all the seats that you can sell and buy on their network, are no longer available in the traditional places where we would go and look for them. They're available on their website, and they're available on direct API connects with those travel management companies that care to adopt the digitalization of IATA's new distribution capability, or NDC for short. And this takes me to my final point here, and that is that the distribution channel is punctured and bleeding. It has become really complicated to find, never mind the best fare, but the most appropriate fare for all our customers. Now, these things I mention only to help explain to you that when you see the cost of air travel going up, it is not an inevitable just because things are more expensive. There are quite a lot of factors and quite a lot of reasons, the way we see it and the way we consume it, that contribute to this. And my role today is certainly not to discourage traveling. That'll be very counterproductive, much as it would do my ESG strategy quite good. The point is, I'm here to help broaden the understanding of what is actually going on. When we get comfortable with the way in which we buy travel, I don't want people to be surprised when it again radically changes, or when we potentially start losing products that this industry takes for granted at the moment. Now, new distribution capability is actually the sexy part of travel at the moment, apart from the fact that many people don't know what to do with it, although it sounds lovely. In short, it's just a new way of technology that will help airlines to achieve their current strategic goals with more bespoke, more targeted way of distributing their content. In the past, historically, in my opinion, there's only 3 factors that really impacted how much you'd pay for a flight ticket. The first one would be the cabin type. The second one, how flexible are you? And the third one is, how full is the plane? That determines how much you're going to pay on an aircraft for your ticket. However, when we look at NDC, we are talking about a whole host of other factors. Who's issuing the ticket? What technology do they use? Who does the traveler work for? What is their frequent flyer status? Are they the appropriate people to upgrade? Which flight today is empty? Which flight is the least popular between these 2 points? All of that will suddenly impact the cost of air traffic, not in a broad way, but minute by minute, hour by hour. We are a long way off from it, because the challenge is that whoever is working on the current technology has got no experience of the old technology. And therefore, we're not asking the questions as to why the old technology functions the way it does. It's very exciting to think that we'll be able to access this content in the future in such a more bespoke-driven way than we currently do. But I think we need to have a bit of patience. When it comes to the maritime sector, change is the norm. And the new technology is still, frankly, incapable of managing changes in the skies. So to wrap it up, what do we do until this one day when this magical distribution channel that we've been promised just suddenly works? I think the first thing I would say here is, let's educate ourselves. Let's understand that airfares don't just increase because everything increases. There are forces behind this going on. Number 2, really understand what you want your travel program to deliver for your business. Make sure that you and your travel management company actually agrees on what type of fares you need and which ones you're buying. And if you disagree, find a solution. If you are price conscious, which I suggest you should be, given where airfare currently are. Make sure that not just your employees know that, but that all your suppliers know that. It's okay to talk about money, because it matters in this particular regard. And then finally, please make sure that you ask your travel company where they buy their content from. In this quest to reduce the cost of travel, there is a growing trend to just buy flight tickets from anywhere in order to drive the price down. What you lose in that sense is the control over your booking. With that comes GDPR legislation, there comes the reactiveness to changes and emergencies. So please make sure that you understand where tickets were bought, because the cost will be low at the beginning, but it will be very high at the end. So, despite my feelings about the Concorde, I am optimistic about the travel industry, and I'd like to continue this conversation. If this is a topic that's interesting to you, you can find me on the Stena AB stand just around the corner. But yes, what we understand, we can solve together.
Thank you, Paul. What we stand, we can solve. Yes. What we solve, we can stand. Just a short question and a short answer. Do you think that the marine fares is under threat?
I think marine fares for some airlines is critical to their own strategic vision, and therefore for those airlines, they will become a growing differentiator. But it is also true that there are loads of airlines that simply has this product just because. And if I were running those airlines, I would ask why. So yes, I think airlines like Ryanair and Wizz Air that I've mentioned before have proved that you don't necessarily need the product. So we must all adjust and understand what would life be like without it.
Thank you. I know, Paul, that it's the first time you attend to Dunster Shipping Meet.
Yes.
Yes. So what is your experience so far?
I think it's been a very inclusive environment. I think probably because of the size and the location. Usually I go to lots of exhibitions that's not just the travel industry, but shipping as well. And it's predominantly a piece of machinery that attracts the attention. So it's lovely being able to speak about the peripheral sides and supply of the shipping industry as well.